Most people believe that clarity arrives all at once, like a lightning strike, like a single answer, like one moment that suddenly explains everything. I used to believe that too. Then I noticed something strange. The moments that changed my life the most didn't feel important when they happened. In fact, they felt ordinary, almost forgettable. A conversation, a glance, a quiet realization on an otherwise normal day. And yet, somehow, years later, those tiny moments became the pieces that explained everything. That's what I need to tell you today, because I think you've been looking at your life the same way most people do. You've been searching for the big answer, the obvious sign, the clear direction. But what if the thing you've been waiting for has already happened? What if the reason life feels confusing isn't because the answers are missing? But because the answers arrived in forms you didn't recognize. I noticed something about you. Not because I know every detail of your story, but because I've spent years studying people, watching patterns, watching behavior, watching what happens when someone carries questions inside themselves for too long. And there is a certain look people develop when they're tired trying to understand their own lives. A quiet exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The exhaustion of constantly asking, why did that happen? Why did they leave? Why did things unfold this way? Why couldn't I see it sooner? Why does this still affect me? I think you felt this too. Maybe more than once. You move forward. You keep functioning. You keep showing up. But somewhere in the background, unresolved questions keep following you, like echoes. Not loud enough to stop your life, but never quiet enough to disappear. And here's the strange part. Most people assume those questions exist because they haven't found the answers yet. But my team discovered something fascinating. The human mind is often less disturbed by missing answers than by answers it refuses to accept. Think about that. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden. Sometimes it's sitting directly in front of us. We simply aren't ready to see it. I realized something recently. The mind protects itself in unusual ways. When a truth feels too painful, too disappointing, too threatening, the mind doesn't always reject it. Sometimes it delays it. Sometimes it places that truth in a locked room somewhere deep inside us, and then years pass. Life continues. Relationships begin and end. Dreams succeed and fail. People enter our lives. People disappear. And all the while, the truth waits. Patiently, quietly, until one day, something happens. And suddenly, everything starts making sense. Not because the truth is new, because you're finally ready to see it. I don't think you've noticed this yet. Some of the most important realizations in your life may already exist inside you. You just haven't connected the pieces. Imagine finding an old photograph, one you've seen hundreds of times. Nothing special, nothing unusual. Then one day you look closer, and suddenly you notice someone standing in the background, a detail you've somehow missed for years. The photograph didn't change. Your eyes changed. That's what recognition feels like. And recognition is powerful because it doesn't add information. It reorganizes information. Suddenly memories rearrange themselves. Experiences rearrange themselves. Pain rearranges itself. Even your mistakes begin to look different. I see this happen constantly. Someone spends years blaming themselves for a failed relationship. Then one realization arrives. Not a dramatic realization, just a quiet one. They realize they spent years trying to earn love instead of receive it. And suddenly, 10 years of confusion begins making sense. The events didn't change, the interpretation changed, the meaning changed, and once meaning changes, everything changes. That's why I think this moment matters. Because something about your journey stood out to me. You've survived things that forced you to become stronger. But strength can be deceptive. Sometimes strength becomes a disguise. People look at you and think you're okay. Maybe you've even convinced yourself you're okay. Yet there are parts of your story you've never fully understood. Parts you've carried without examining. Parts that still influence your decisions, your relationships, your fears, your expectations, your sense of worth. And here's what fascinates me. Most people don't realize how much of their present life is being directed by conclusions they reached years ago. Conclusions they don't even remember making. A child gets ignored and unconsciously learns, my needs don't matter. A teenager gets rejected and unconsciously learns, I have to become someone else to be loved. An adult experiences betrayal and unconsciously learns, trust is dangerous. Years later, those conclusions remain silent, invisible, yet powerful, like software running in the background. I need to tell you something important. The mind rarely stores events, it stores meanings. Two people can experience the exact same situation and emerge with completely different beliefs, because the event isn't what shapes us most. The meaning we attach to the event does. And that's where everything starts becoming interesting, because many of the meanings you've carried may no longer be true. They may have served a purpose once, they may have helped you survive, but survival and understanding are not the same thing. I remember speaking with someone who spent most of her life feeling invisible. She wasn't ignored, not really. People cared about her, friends appreciated her, family loved her, but none of it mattered, because decades earlier she'd interpreted a painful experience as evidence that she wasn't important. That conclusion became the lens through which she viewed everything. Every compliment felt temporary, every act of kindness felt accidental, every connection felt fragile. Then one day she saw something. Not a new memory, an old memory. The same memory she'd carried for years. But she saw it differently. For the first time, she realized the people around her hadn't rejected her. They had simply been struggling with their own pain. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. Her entire life story began reorganizing itself. That's what recognition does. It doesn't erase the past, it reveals the past. And when the past becomes clearer, the present becomes lighter. I think you've been approaching your life like a detective searching for missing clues. But what if you're actually an archaeologist? What if the clues already exist? Buried beneath assumptions, buried beneath old conclusions, buried beneath stories you've repeated so many times they've started feeling permanent. Because permanence is one of the mind's greatest illusions. A feeling is not a fact. A wound is not an identity. A difficult chapter is not the entire book. Yet we forget this, especially when pain lasts a long time. Pain has a way of introducing itself as truth. It whispers, "This is who you are. This is how life works. This is what you should expect." And if nobody challenges those whispers, they become beliefs. Then beliefs become reality, at least for a while. I realized something recently that I can't stop thinking about. The people who experience the deepest transformations aren't always the strongest. They're not always the smartest. They're not always the most disciplined. Often they're simply the people willing to look again, willing to revisit old assumptions, willing to question old conclusions, willing to ask, what if I misunderstood something important? That question changes everything. Because certainty creates walls, curiosity creates doors. And maybe that's why you're here. Maybe some part of you already feels it. A quiet shift. A subtle awareness, a sense that something you've been carrying for years is beginning to reveal itself. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough to make you curious, just enough to make you wonder, just enough to make you stay. Because the moment everything starts making sense doesn't begin with understanding. It begins with recognition. The recognition that there is more to your story than you've been able to see. The recognition that your confusion may have been protecting a deeper truth. The recognition that some answers arrive only when you're ready to receive them, and perhaps most importantly, the recognition that the life you've been trying so hard to understand may already be trying to explain itself to you, quietly, patiently, one piece at a time. Recognition is a strange thing. At first it feels like relief. You finally notice a pattern, you finally see a connection, you finally realize that certain experiences weren't random after all. But then something unexpected happens. The moment recognition settles in, a deeper question emerges. Why? Why did those patterns exist in the first place? Why did certain experiences affect you so deeply? Why did some moments leave scars while others disappeared without a trace? This is where understanding begins. And understanding is different from recognition. Recognition allows you to see. Understanding allows you to heal. I think you felt the difference. There have probably been moments when you knew exactly what was wrong. You recognized it perfectly, yet nothing changed. Because awareness alone isn't transformation. You can know the name of a wound and still carry it. You can understand a fear intellectually and still feel controlled by it. You can identify a pattern and still repeat it. That's because understanding isn't something the mind does alone. The heart has to participate, and the heart moves slower, much slower. I noticed something about people who carry emotional pain for a long time. Eventually, they stop asking whether the pain is justified. Instead, they start organizing their lives around it. They make decisions around it, relationships around it, expectations around it, even dreams around it. Without realizing it, the wound becomes part of the architecture. Not because they want it to, because adaptation is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. The mind doesn't always solve problems. Sometimes it learns to live around them. Imagine a tree growing beside a large rock. The tree doesn't remove the obstacle, it bends around it. Its roots adapt, its shape changes. Years later, the tree looks natural, but its entire structure was influenced by something hidden beneath the surface. People are often the same way. I see this in you. Not necessarily because you've suffered more than anyone else. Everyone carries something. But because you've learned how to function despite unanswered questions. You've learned how to continue despite disappointment. You've learned how to smile while carrying uncertainty. And that's admirable, but it can also be dangerous, because the better we become at carrying something, the less likely we are to question whether we should still be carrying it. I realized something recently. Many people believe loneliness comes from being alone, but that's rarely the whole story. Some of the loneliest people I've ever met were surrounded by others. They had conversations, friendships, families, relationships, yet they still felt unseen. Do you know why? Because loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of being understood. And when someone spends years feeling misunderstood, something subtle begins to happen. They start hiding parts of themselves, not intentionally, not consciously, gradually, a little at a time. They stop sharing certain thoughts, certain fears, certain hopes, not because they're dishonest, because experience taught them those parts weren't safe. The tragedy is that the more someone hides, the more disconnected they feel. And the more disconnected they feel, the more they hide. It's a cycle, a quiet one, but a powerful one. I think you've encountered this cycle before. Maybe not dramatically, maybe not in a way anyone else could see, but somewhere along the way, there were pieces of yourself you stopped showing. Pieces that felt too vulnerable, too complicated, too difficult to explain. So you carried them alone. And carrying something alone changes your relationship with it. Problems become heavier, questions become louder, doubts become more convincing, because isolation magnifies uncertainty. That's one reason emotional safety matters so much. Not comfort, not constant reassurance, safety. There's a difference. Comfort tells you nothing is wrong. Safety tells you it's okay to be honest about what's wrong. And many people spend their entire lives searching for comfort, when what they truly need is safety. My team discovered something fascinating when studying long-term relationships. The strongest relationships weren't built on perfection. Not even close. They were built on permission. Permission to be imperfect, permission to be uncertain, permission to be human. When people feel safe enough to be seen honestly, something remarkable happens. The energy previously spent hiding becomes available for healing. Think about how exhausting it is to manage appearances, to monitor reactions, to anticipate judgment, to edit yourself constantly. Now imagine what becomes possible when that energy is released. This is one reason certain people change our lives. Not because they fix us, not because they save us, because they allow us to stop performing. For a little while, and in that space, we meet ourselves again. I need to tell you a story. Years ago, I met a man who seemed incredibly confident. Successful career, strong presence, always composed. The kind of person everyone assumed had everything figured out. One evening we had a long conversation. Hours passed. The deeper we talked, the more his certainty began to disappear. Eventually, he admitted something he'd never told anyone. For most of his life, he'd been terrified of disappointing people. Everything he'd achieved had been built around avoiding that feeling. Success wasn't his goal. Protection was. Achievement was simply the strategy. That realization changed him. Not immediately, not dramatically, but permanently. Because once he understood the fear beneath the behavior, he stopped fighting the wrong battle. And that's what understanding often reveals. The visible problem is rarely the real problem. The visible problem is usually the symptom. Someone fears commitment, but beneath that fear is vulnerability. Someone struggles with confidence, but beneath that struggle is rejection. Someone constantly seeks validation, but beneath that need is a question they've carried for years. Am I enough? Understanding means following the thread deeper, not stopping at behavior, not stopping at emotion, following the thread until you find the belief underneath. Because beliefs shape everything. Most people think they make decisions based on facts. They don't. They make decisions based on meanings. And meanings come from beliefs. If someone believes they're unworthy, they'll interpret kindness differently. If someone believes they're lovable, they'll interpret kindness differently. Same event, different reality. This is why two people can walk through the same world and experience completely different lives. Not because reality changes, because perception changes. I don't think you've noticed this yet. Many of the emotions you've been trying to eliminate may actually be trying to teach you something. Fear often points toward importance. Grief points toward love. Loneliness points toward connection. Jealousy points toward desire. Regret points toward wisdom. Emotions are messengers, yet most of us treat them like enemies. We try to suppress them, escape them, outrun them. But messages ignored don't disappear. They repeat themselves, often louder than before. I remember standing near the ocean once, just before sunrise. The horizon was almost invisible. Everything looked uncertain, blurred, undefined. For a while, it seemed impossible to distinguish the water from the sky. Then the light slowly began to change. Not suddenly, gradually. And as visibility improved, I realized something. The landscape hadn't changed at all, only my ability to see it. That memory returns to me often, because understanding works exactly the same way. Life doesn't instantly become easier, the past doesn't disappear, the questions don't all vanish, but clarity increases, and with clarity comes a new relationship to everything you've experienced. The things that once felt random begin revealing patterns. The things that felt unfair begin revealing lessons. The things that felt meaningless begin revealing purpose, not because you're forcing meaning onto them, because meaning was there all along, hidden beneath confusion, hidden beneath pain, hidden beneath time. I think you've already started sensing this. That's why certain memories have been resurfacing lately. That's why certain realizations feel different now than they did before. You're not revisiting the past because you're stuck. You're revisiting it because you're ready. Ready to see something you couldn't see before. Ready to understand something that previously felt impossible. Ready to recognize that some experiences weren't punishments. They were instructions, not pleasant instructions, not easy instructions, but instructions nonetheless. And the more honestly you examine them, the more clearly they begin speaking. Because life has an unusual habit. The lessons we avoid become patterns. The lessons we understand become wisdom. And wisdom is what transforms suffering into meaning. That transformation doesn't happen through force. It happens through understanding, through patience, through curiosity, through the willingness to look beneath the surface. And as you continue looking, something even deeper begins to emerge. Not just an explanation for what happened, not just an understanding of why, but a truth so important that once you see it, you can never return to seeing yourself the same way again. There comes a moment in every meaningful journey when understanding is no longer enough. You recognize the pattern, you understand where it came from, you see how it shaped your choices, and yet something still feels unfinished. Because beneath every pattern, beneath every wound, beneath every fear, there is a deeper truth waiting to be discovered. And this truth changes everything. Not because it gives you more information, because it changes the way you see yourself. I realized something recently that stayed with me longer than I expected. Most people spend years trying to understand what happened to them. Very few spend time understanding what happened because of them. Not what they caused, not what they ruined, not what they did wrong. What happened because they survived. What happened because they kept going. What happened because they adapted. Because while pain leaves scars, it also leaves strengths. The problem is that most people are far more aware of their scars than their strengths. You can usually describe your disappointments in great detail. You remember who hurt you. You remember what was said. You remember what was lost. But when was the last time you carefully examined the qualities those experiences created? The patience, the awareness, the empathy, the resilience, the ability to recognize suffering in others, the ability to appreciate things most people overlook. I think you felt this before. Have you ever met someone who had never struggled? Someone whose life seemed untouched by hardship? Sometimes those people are kind. Sometimes they're successful. But often there is something missing. A certain depth, a certain understanding, a certain softness. Because some forms of wisdom can only be earned. And unfortunately, life often charges a painful price for them. I noticed something about you. There are things you've survived that nobody fully understands, not because people don't care, Because some experiences are impossible to explain completely. There are nights only you remember, thoughts only you heard, battles only you fought, moments when nobody knew how close you were to giving up, moments when nobody saw how much strength it took just to continue. Those moments matter, more than you realize, because they shaped the person sitting here right now. And yet I think you've underestimated their significance. Many people look back on painful chapters and see only loss. But life is rarely that simple. The same experience that breaks one part of you often develops another. The same disappointment that closes one door often opens an entirely different perspective. The same loneliness that hurts you can teach you how to truly value connection. This doesn't make suffering good. It doesn't justify pain. It simply reveals something deeper. Life is more complex than reward and punishment. Much more complex. I need to tell you something important. One of the greatest misunderstandings people carry is the belief that healing means returning to who they were before. It doesn't. It never has. Healing isn't restoration. Healing is integration. The goal isn't becoming the person you were before life happened. The goal is becoming the person you are because life happened. There's a difference, a profound difference. Imagine a piece of pottery that breaks. Most people think healing means making it look untouched, as though the cracks never existed. But the most beautiful restoration traditions in the world do the opposite. They highlight the cracks, not to celebrate damage, to honor survival. The object becomes more valuable because its history remains visible. And perhaps people are the same way. Perhaps your worth was never dependent on appearing unbroken. Perhaps your worth increases every time you choose honesty over perfection, every time you choose growth over denial, every time you choose understanding over self-condemnation. Because the deeper truth isn't that you've been damaged. The deeper truth is that you've been transformed, and transformation feels confusing while it's happening. A caterpillar probably doesn't understand the cocoon. A seed probably doesn't understand the darkness beneath the soil, and yet both processes contain the blueprint for what comes next. I think you've been judging yourself from the middle of the process. That's why things have felt so confusing. You're evaluating a story that hasn't finished unfolding. You're demanding certainty from a chapter that was designed to create growth. You're asking for final answers while still gathering essential pieces. And because of that, you've been unfair to yourself. Much harsher than you would ever be toward someone else. Why do we do that? Why are we often compassionate toward everyone except ourselves? Why do we forgive others for being human while expecting ourselves to be flawless? My team discovered a fascinating pattern. People who struggle most with self-worth are often the people who care deeply about others. At first that seems contradictory, but it makes sense, because caring deeply creates responsibility. Responsibility creates pressure. Pressure creates fear. And fear constantly asks one question: what if I'm not enough? That question hides everywhere. Behind perfectionism, behind people-pleasing, behind overworking, behind emotional withdrawal, behind constant self-improvement. The behaviors look different. The question remains the same. What if I'm not enough? And here's the deeper truth. Most people spend their lives trying to answer that question, trying to prove their worth, trying to earn it, trying to secure it, trying to validate it, without realizing the question itself is flawed. Because worth isn't something earned, it's something recognized. The sun doesn't earn permission to shine. A tree doesn't earn permission to grow. A child doesn't earn permission to matter. Value exists before achievement, before approval, before success, before validation. You knew this once. Everyone does. Then life happens. Criticism happens. Comparison happens. Rejection happens. Failure happens. And gradually we forget. We begin measuring ourselves through outcomes, through accomplishments, through acceptance, through performance. And the moment we do, we hand our worth to circumstances. That's a dangerous trade because circumstances constantly change. Some days life applauds you, some days it ignores you. Some days it rewards your effort, some days it doesn't. If worth depends on circumstances, then worth becomes unstable. But true worth was never meant to be negotiated. It was meant to be recognized. I remember a winter evening many years ago. I was walking through a city after a heavy snowfall. Everything seemed transformed. Familiar streets looked unfamiliar. Ordinary buildings looked extraordinary. For a moment, I wondered why. Then I realized something simple. The city hadn't become beautiful. The snow had revealed beauty that was already there, and that thought never left me. Because people are often the same. The qualities that matter most aren't usually created, they're revealed. Patience reveals them. Adversity reveals them. Love reveals them. Loss reveals them. Time reveals them. And perhaps that's what has been happening in your life all along. Perhaps the experiences you've struggled to understand weren't random interruptions. Perhaps they were revelations. Not revelations about the world, revelations about you, about your strength, your heart, your resilience, your capacity to continue, your ability to grow, your ability to love despite disappointment, your ability to hope despite uncertainty. I don't think you've fully seen that yet. You've spent so much time focusing on what was taken from you that you've overlooked what was created within you. And that's understandable. Pain naturally draws attention. Growth is quieter. Loss announces itself loudly. Wisdom develops silently. But silence does not mean absence. Something valuable has been forming inside you for years, through every challenge, every setback, every unanswered question. And now you're beginning to see it, not completely, not all at once, but enough to recognize that your story may be about far more than survival. Enough to recognize that the person you became is not evidence of what happened to you. It's evidence of what you did with what happened to you. And once that truth becomes clear, another realization begins emerging. One that changes not only how you view your past, but how you step into your future. There is a moment that arrives quietly. No announcement, no dramatic music, no sudden miracle. Just a subtle shift. A shift so small you almost miss it. And yet it changes everything. Because after recognition, after understanding, after discovering the deeper truth, something begins happening inside you. You stop asking the same questions. Not because you forced yourself to stop, because they no longer hold the same power. I think you've experienced glimpses of this already. Perhaps only for a moment. Perhaps only once or twice. A memory appears. A memory that used to hurt. A memory that used to pull you backward. And suddenly it feels different. The memory is still there. The facts are still there. But the weight has changed. The emotional gravity has changed. And for the first time, you realize something important. Healing was never about changing the memory. Healing was about changing your relationship to the memory. That realization alone can free a person. Because most people spend years fighting their past, trying to erase it, trying to rewrite it, trying to escape it. But the past is surprisingly stubborn. The more aggressively we resist it, the more tightly it clings to us. Yet when we finally understand it, when we finally listen to it, when we finally allow it to become part of our story instead of an enemy of our story, something softens, something releases. I realized something recently. The strongest people I know are not the people who conquered every fear. They are the people who stopped needing fear to disappear before moving forward. That's a very different thing, because courage isn't the absence of uncertainty. Courage is the decision that uncertainty will not make your choices for you. For years, many people wait. They wait until they feel ready. They wait until they feel confident. They wait until they feel certain. But certainty is one of life's rarest experiences. Most meaningful decisions happen long before certainty arrives. Love happens before certainty. Trust happens before certainty. Growth happens before certainty. Transformation happens before certainty. And perhaps that's what you've been learning all along. Not how to eliminate uncertainty, how to walk beside it. I noticed something about your journey. You've spent a long time trying to understand what life was asking of you. But I think a more important question has quietly emerged. What is life preparing you for? Because those are not the same question. One looks backward, the other looks forward. One searches for explanation, the other searches for possibility, and possibility changes everything. I need to tell you something. Many people unknowingly build their future using materials from their past. Old disappointments, old fears, old assumptions, old limitations. They construct tomorrow using yesterday's pain. Then they wonder why nothing changes. But transformation begins when you stop treating old conclusions as permanent truths. Just because something happened before does not mean it will happen again. Just because someone failed to understand you does not mean nobody ever will. Just because trust was broken does not mean trust is impossible. Just because a dream didn't unfold the way you hoped does not mean the story is over. The mind often confuses familiarity with truth. That's one of its greatest tricks. A belief repeated for years begins feeling factual. even when it isn't, especially when it isn't. And sometimes transformation begins with a single question. What if the thing I've believed about myself isn't true? Not completely true. Not anymore. Imagine carrying an old map, a map created decades ago, a map based on roads that no longer exist, bridges that were replaced, paths that disappeared. At some point, the map stops helping. Not because maps are bad, because reality changed. People often carry emotional maps exactly like that. Maps created during heartbreak, maps created during rejection, maps created during fear, maps created when they knew far less than they know now. Yet they continue navigating life using outdated directions. And then one day, something remarkable happens. They realize they're allowed to update the map. You're allowed to update yours, too. You're allowed to release conclusions that no longer serve you. You're allowed to outgrow identities that no longer fit. You're allowed to become someone new without betraying who you used to be. In fact, that's what growth requires. I think you've underestimated how much you've already changed. Because change is difficult to see from the inside. When you're living it every day, it feels invisible. Yet, if you could step outside your life for a moment, if you could meet the version of yourself from 5 years ago, you might be shocked by what you notice. The strength, the awareness, the wisdom, the resilience, the patience, the perspective, the things you once prayed to develop, the things life quietly taught you, not through comfort, through experience. And now those lessons belong to you forever. No one can take them away. Not failure, not disappointment, not time, not circumstance. They are part of you now. My team discovered something interesting when studying major life transitions. The people who adapted most successfully weren't necessarily the people with the best plans. They were the people willing to let go of old identities. Because every transformation requires a release. You can't become something new while desperately protecting everything old. A tree releases leaves. A river releases water. A season releases its place to another season. Nature understands what humans often resist. Growth requires movement. Movement requires release. And release requires trust. Not trust that everything will be perfect. Trust that you can handle what comes next. That distinction matters, because life never promises perfection. But your life has already provided evidence of something equally valuable. Evidence that you can survive uncertainty. Evidence that you can adapt. Evidence that you can continue. Evidence that you are far stronger than your fears would have you believe. I don't think you've fully recognized that yet. You still measure yourself against moments when you struggled, but struggle was never proof of weakness. Struggle was proof of engagement, proof that you cared, proof that you were trying, proof that you were alive enough to risk disappointment. And that matters. More than most people realize, because the opposite of pain is not happiness. The opposite of pain is numbness. And despite everything you've experienced, you never became completely numb. Some part of you kept hoping. Some part of you kept searching. Some part of you kept believing there was meaning hidden somewhere inside the confusion. That part of you was right. There was. There always was. The moment everything starts making sense isn't the moment life becomes perfect. It's the moment you stop demanding perfection before allowing yourself peace. It's the moment you stop seeing yourself as broken. It's the moment you stop measuring your worth through old wounds. It's the moment you realize that your story was never falling apart. It was becoming something you couldn't yet understand. And now, slowly, patiently, beautifully, understanding is arriving, not all at once, but enough. Enough to trust yourself again. Enough to trust life again. Enough to move forward without needing every answer. Enough to believe that the chapters ahead deserve your attention more than the chapters behind. Because the truth is this, you were never lost. You were learning. You were never falling behind. You were becoming. And you were never as broken as you feared. You were transforming. Final ending. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe some part of you was already beginning to sense it. The connections, the patterns, the meaning hidden beneath experiences that once seemed random. You spent years searching for answers, and perhaps what you've discovered is that the answers were never separate from your journey. They were woven into it. Every disappointment, every delay, every heartbreak, every unexpected turn, every lesson, every person, every goodbye, every beginning. All of it contributed to the person you are now, not the perfect version, the real version, the wiser version, the deeper version, the version capable of seeing what you couldn't see before. And if there's one thing I hope you carry with you after this conversation, it's this. The moment everything starts making sense isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a new relationship with your life. A relationship built not on fear, but understanding, not on confusion, but clarity, not on self-doubt, but self-recognition. So if you've been waiting for a sign, perhaps this is it. Not a sign that everything will be easy, a sign that you're finally seeing yourself clearly. And sometimes, that's the moment that changes everything. The moment everything starts making sense.